Ethan stared at the legal documents spread across the worn wooden table, his hands trembling as he read the terms that would seal his fate. At 22, he had imagined many possible futures for himself, but none of them involved an arranged marriage to a woman he had never met. The weight of his father's gambling debts pressed down on him like a suffocating blanket, each number on the page representing years of poor decisions and broken promises that had finally come to collect their due. His father sat across from him, unable to meet his son's eyes, the shame radiating from him in waves that filled the small kitchen with an uncomfortable tension. The older man's weathered hands shook as he lit another cigarette, the flame illuminating the deep lines of regret etched into his face like a roadmap of bad choices. Ethan had always known this day would come, had watched the debts pile up like autumn leaves, but somehow he had hoped for a miracle that never arrived. The woman he was to marry was named Ilara, and beyond her age of 52, he knew virtually nothing about her. The arrangement had been brokered through intermediaries, shadowy figures who spoke in hushed tones and dealt in favors rather than currency. She had agreed to pay off the substantial debts in exchange for marriage, a transaction that felt more like a business deal than the foundation of a life together. Ethan wondered what kind of woman would enter into such an arrangement. What circumstances had led her to seek out a husband 30 years her junior through such unconventional means? The wedding ceremony was a sparse affair, held in a small courthouse with only the necessary witnesses present. Ethan wore his father's old suit, altered hastily to fit his leaner frame, while Ilara appeared in a simple but elegant navy dress that spoke of quality and refinement. She was beautiful in an understated way, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a sophisticated chignon, her green eyes holding depths that hinted at experiences far beyond what her composed exterior revealed. When they exchanged vows, her voice was steady and sure, while his own words came out as barely audible whispers. As they walked out of the courthouse together, Ilara's hand resting lightly on his arm, Ethan caught glimpses of the woman beneath the mysterious facade. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to navigating complex situations, her posture straight and purposeful, despite the unusual circumstances that had brought them together. When she spoke to him, her voice carried traces of an accent he couldn't quite place, as if she had lived in many places and absorbed something from each of them. The house she brought him to was larger than anything he had ever lived in, a Victorian-era structure with intricate woodwork and tall windows that let in streams of golden afternoon light. The furnishings were tasteful but not ostentatious, suggesting someone with refined taste who preferred quality over showiness. As she showed him to his room, Ethan noticed the way she moved through the space with familiar ease, yet something in her manner suggested that even this beautiful home was temporary, just another stop in a journey that had taken her far from wherever she had started. During their first dinner together, Ilara proved to be an engaging conversationalist, asking thoughtful questions about his interrupted studies and his dreams for the future. She listened with genuine interest as he spoke about his passion for architecture, his plans to return to university once the family's financial situation stabilized. Her own background remained largely mysterious, though she spoke knowledgeably about art, literature, and world affairs with the fluency of someone who had lived rather than merely read about such things. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan found himself drawn to this enigmatic woman who had rescued him from his family's dire circumstances. She encouraged him to pursue his studies, setting up a workspace in the home's sun-filled library where he could work on his architectural drawings and correspondence courses. Sometimes he would catch her watching him work, a soft expression on her face that made him wonder what thoughts were running through her mind during those quiet moments of observation. Ilara proved to be an excellent cook, preparing meals that drew from various international cuisines with the skill of someone who had learned these recipes through travel rather than cookbooks. As they shared these meals, she would sometimes tell stories of places she had visited, painting vivid pictures of bustling marketplaces in Morocco, quiet cafes in Prague, or sunset views from Mediterranean terraces. Yet she always spoke as if these experiences belonged to someone else, maintaining a careful distance from her own past that Ethan began to recognize as deliberate evasion. The peaceful rhythm of their unconventional domestic life was shattered on a Tuesday morning when three men appeared at their front door. Ethan had been working in the library when he heard the aggressive pounding that seemed to shake the entire frame of the house. Through the window, he could see them standing on the porch, their dark clothing and serious expressions immediately setting off alarm bells in his mind. These were not social visitors or traveling salesmen, but men who carried themselves with the kind of purposeful tension that suggested danger. Ilara's reaction to the sound was immediate and telling. The color drained from her face, and she moved swiftly to the front window, peering out at their uninvited guests with the practiced caution of someone who had been expecting such a visit. Her entire demeanor changed in that instant, the relaxed woman he had come to know replaced by someone alert and calculating, someone prepared for confrontation. When she spoke, her voice was tight with controlled fear, and for the first time since he had known her, Ethan heard genuine vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "there are things about my past that I haven't told you, things that have finally caught up with me. These men are here because of who I used to be, because of choices I made that seemed right at the time but have consequences I'm still paying for." She turned to face him, her green eyes filled with an apology and a plea for understanding that made his chest tighten with protective instinct. The pounding grew more insistent, accompanied now by harsh voices demanding that she open the door. Ilara's hands shook as she moved away from the window, and Ethan could see her mind working rapidly, calculating options and outcomes with the speed of someone accustomed to navigating dangerous situations. She told him then, in hurried whispers, that her real name was Catherine Walsh, and that she was running from men who believed she had stolen something valuable from them, something that could expose federal crimes and bring down powerful people who preferred to remain in the shadows. Years ago, she had worked at a private bank that catered to clients who valued discretion above all else. She had discovered evidence of money laundering, tax evasion, and other financial crimes that reached into the highest levels of government and business. When she tried to report these crimes through proper channels, she found herself targeted instead of protected, marked for elimination by people who had too much to lose if the truth came to light. Taking the evidence had been an act of desperation, a way to ensure her own survival while hoping to eventually find someone trustworthy enough to help her expose the corruption she had uncovered. The men outside grew tired of waiting and began attempting to force the door open, their voices carrying threats that made Ethan's blood run cold. Ilara, or Catherine as she truly was, moved through the house with purpose, retrieving items from hidden locations with the efficiency of someone who had prepared for this moment. She handed him a cell phone with a pre-programmed number, instructing him to call for help if something happened to her, to give the evidence to people who could use it properly to ensure justice was served. When the front door finally gave way under their assault, the three men entered with weapons drawn, their faces hard with the kind of professional menace that spoke of violence as a tool of trade. Their leader, a man whose expensive suit couldn't disguise the predatory gleam in his eyes, addressed Catherine by her real name, his voice carrying the mock politeness of someone who enjoyed having power over others. He introduced himself as Marcus Brennan, representing interests that had been very patient, but were now demanding the return of what belonged to them. Catherine faced them with remarkable composure, her chin raised defiantly despite the obvious danger she was in. She had hidden the evidence well, she told them, and it would be released to the appropriate authorities if anything happened to her. This was clearly not the response they had hoped for, and Brennan's expression darkened with the realization that intimidation alone would not be sufficient to achieve their goals. He gestured to his companions, and Ethan could see the situation escalating toward violence with terrifying inevitability. Throughout this confrontation, Ethan found himself caught between terror and admiration for the woman he had married. This was not the quiet, mysterious woman who cooked elaborate dinners and asked about his architectural studies, but someone who had lived with danger as a constant companion and had developed the strength to face it head-on. Her transformation revealed layers of character and experience that made him understand why she had seemed so worldly, so careful, so deliberately private about her past. The standoff continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, with Brennan alternating between threats and attempts at negotiation, while Catherine remained steadfast in her refusal to cooperate. Ethan could see the calculation in the man's eyes as he weighed his options, the growing realization that this situation might require more extreme measures than he had initially anticipated. When Brennan finally reached for his weapon, time seemed to slow to a crawl, each second stretching out like an eternity as Ethan watched events unfold with crystal clarity. The gun appeared in Brennan's hand with practiced smoothness, the metal gleaming dully in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Catherine didn't flinch, didn't step back or beg for mercy, but stood her ground with the courage of someone who had already made peace with the possible consequences of her choices. In that moment, Ethan saw not just the woman who had saved his family from financial ruin, but someone who had risked everything to stand up against corruption and injustice, someone whose sacrifice deserved protection rather than punishment. Without conscious thought, Ethan threw himself between Catherine and the gun just as Brennan pulled the trigger. The bullet struck him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the floor in an explosion of pain that seemed to radiate through every nerve in his body. Through the haze of shock and agony, he could hear Catherine crying out his name, could feel her hands pressing against the wound as she tried to stem the flow of blood that was steadily seeping through his shirt. The sound of sirens in the distance suggested that someone had called for help, and Brennan's composure finally cracked as he realized that his carefully planned operation had devolved into chaos. The arrival of law enforcement officers, transformed the scene from a private confrontation into a crime scene, with Catherine's evidence finally finding its way to people who could use it to bring justice to those who had believed themselves above the law. Brennan and his associates were arrested on multiple charges, their faces showing the grim realization that their employers would not be pleased with this spectacular failure. As paramedics worked to stabilize Ethan's condition, Catherine held his hand and whispered apologies mixed with promises that everything would be different now, that the truth was finally coming to light. The evidence she had protected for so long would ensure that the people responsible for the corruption she had discovered would face consequences for their actions, while Brennan and his associates would spend considerable time in federal prison for their roles in the conspiracy. Through the pain medication and the fog of trauma, Ethan felt a profound sense of satisfaction that their ordeal had not been for nothing. Recovery was a slow process that brought them closer together than any conventional courtship could have achieved. As Ethan healed from his wound, Catherine cared for him with a tenderness that spoke of genuine affection rather than mere obligation. The secrets between them had been stripped away by violence, leaving them free to build their relationship on a foundation of complete honesty and mutual respect. She told him everything about her past, her years of running and hiding, her constant fear of discovery, and her growing hope that she might finally be able to live openly under her own name. In a mysterious turn of events that Catherine attributed to the gratitude of powerful people who preferred to remain anonymous, Ethan's family debts were completely forgiven, wiped clean as if they had never existed. His father wept with relief when he learned that the shadow of financial ruin had been lifted from their family. Finally able to meet his son's eyes without the weight of shame that had burdened him for so long, the gesture seemed to confirm Catherine's assertion that the evidence she had preserved had indeed reached people who valued justice and were willing to reward those who had suffered in its service. As months passed and the media coverage of the corruption scandal faded from the headlines, Ethan and Catherine settled into the kind of peaceful domestic life that both had thought impossible given their circumstances. They were no longer bound together by financial necessity or legal obligation, but by genuine love that had grown from shared adversity and mutual respect. Catherine resumed using her real name, no longer needing to hide from those who had hunted her, while Ethan returned to his architectural studies with renewed purpose and his wife's unwavering support. Their love story was unconventional by any measure, born from desperation and forged in danger, but it had produced a marriage based on complete honesty and profound gratitude for second chances. When they looked back on the strange circumstances that had brought them together, they saw not a business transaction or a marriage of convenience, but the hand of fate working through seemingly impossible odds to bring two people together who were perfectly suited for each other, despite their differences in age and experience. In the end, Ethan and Catherine were not just happily married, but deeply grateful for the circuitous path that had led them to each other, understanding that their love had been tested in ways that few couples ever experience, and had emerged stronger for the trials they had endured together.